Bully spills juice on new student. Little did he know he was a martial arts master. Ethan Mitchell took a deep breath while holding his food tray. It was his first day at that school in Chicago, and all he wanted was to go unnoticed. But fate had other plans. Suddenly he felt the cold, sticky liquid dripping down his head. The dark grape juice stained his new grey hoodie, the one his grandmother had bought with such care. The entire cafeteria fell silent. All eyes turned to him and the boy in the red shirt holding the empty cup with a satisfied smile on his face. "Sorry there, newbie," said the bully, without a trace of regret in his voice. It was an accident. Laughter began to echo across the tables. Ethan wiped his face slowly, with calm and controlled movements. He grabbed some napkins and started drying his curly hair, which was now sticky and stained. His breathing remained steady, deep. He mentally counted to 10 as his grandpa always taught him. "It's okay," Ethan replied, looking the bully in the eyes. "Accidents happen." The smile on the red-shirted boy's face wavered for a moment. He hadn't expected this reaction. Usually his victims cried, yelled, or ran to complain to some teacher. But this newbie just looked at him with a disturbing serenity. "What's your name?" asked the bully, crossing his arms. "Ethan. And you?" "Brandon. Brandon Thompson. But everyone here calls me Brandon." Ethan just nodded and went back to cleaning his hoodie. Across the cafeteria, Principal Margaret Wilson watched everything closely. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the boy's face. That was the same boy who, 3 months ago, had saved her mother from a mugging outside the grocery store. She remembered that day perfectly. Her mother, Mrs. Dorothy, an 82-year-old lady, had just finished shopping when 2 men tried to snatch her purse. That's when a teenager appeared out of nowhere, and with precise and calculated moves, immobilized the muggers without hurting them, holding them until other people came to help. Margaret had searched for the boy for weeks to thank him, but he had disappeared before she could find out his name. And now there he was, being humiliated by Brandon Thompson, the most troublesome student in the school. The principal thought about intervening, but something made her stop. She wanted to see how Ethan would handle the situation. There was something about that boy that inspired confidence, a maturity that went beyond his apparent age. Brandon couldn't take his eyes off the newbie. Something about that reaction bothered him deeply. He was used to feeling the power that came from others' fear, but Ethan showed no fear at all. It was as if he simply didn't care. "Hey, didn't you hear what I said?" Brandon insisted, stepping closer. "I'm Brandon, I run this school." "I see," Ethan replied calmly. "Nice to meet you." "Nice?" Brandon let out a bitter laugh. "You're funny, newbie, really funny." Ethan picked up his tray and walked to an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria. He sat with his back to Brandon, as if nothing had happened. He began to eat slowly, chewing each bite with full attention. His grandmother Evelyn always said that eating too fast was bad for digestion. Brandon stood still in the middle of the cafeteria, feeling strangely frustrated. His friends called him back to their table, but he kept staring at the newbie's back. Something was wrong. That kid should have been crying, running, begging. But instead, he was eating as if he were at home, completely at ease. "Leave the newbie alone, Brandon," said Tyler, one of Brandon's friends. "He's not worth it." But Brandon couldn't let it go. For the first time in a long while, someone hadn't reacted the way he expected, and that left him unsettled in a way he couldn't explain. The bell rang and the students began leaving the cafeteria. Ethan washed his tray and put it in the right place before heading to his next class. In the hallway, some students looked at him with pity, others with curiosity. A girl with long hair approached him. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked. "Don't mind Brandon, he's like that with every new person." "I'm fine, thank you," Ethan replied with a gentle smile. "What's your name?" "Emma Walker. I've studied here since 5th grade." "Nice to meet you, Emma. Can you show me where room 203 is?" Emma nodded yes and began guiding him through the halls. As they walked, she couldn't contain her curiosity. "How did you manage to stay so calm? If it were me, I would have exploded. Brandon did that to another boy last year, and the kid had to change schools. He couldn't handle the pressure." Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "My grandfather always taught me that reacting with anger only makes things worse. True strength lies in keeping control even when they want to get under your skin. Emma looked at him with admiration. Your grandfather seems very wise. Yeah, Ethan agreed, and for the first time his voice carried a hint of sadness. He's the wisest person I know. They arrived at the classroom and Ethan thanked Emma for her help. He entered and looked for an empty seat at the back of the room. The math teacher, Mr. Richard, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, was already writing equations on the board. We have a new student today, the teacher announced when Ethan entered. Please introduce yourself to the class. Ethan stood up beside his desk. My name is Ethan Mitchell. I came from Cleveland, and it's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, Ethan, said the teacher. I hope you adjust well. You may sit. The class proceeded normally, but Ethan could feel the curious glances from his classmates. Some were whispering quietly, probably commenting on the incident in the cafeteria. He ignored the gossip and focused on the teacher's explanations. When class ended, Emma waited for him at the door. I need to tell you something, she said in a low voice. Brandon won't leave you alone. When he picks someone as a target, he doesn't stop until the person breaks. Why does he do that? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Emma shrugged. No one knows for sure. Some say it's because his parents are never home. His dad owns a big company, and his mom is a lawyer. They're always traveling, working. Brandon spends more time with the housekeeper than with his own family. Ethan absorbed this information silently. Suddenly, the bully didn't seem so scary. He just seemed like another lost boy trying to find his place in the world the only way he knew how. The following days confirmed Emma's warning. Brandon intensified the teasing. He pushed Ethan in the halls, threw his notebooks on the floor, made mean comments during classes. But Ethan kept responding with the same disconcerting serenity. He never fought back, never complained. He just looked Brandon in the eyes and moved on. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday of that first week, the physical education teacher, Mr. Michael, a former athlete who still maintained impressive physical shape, announced they would have an endurance competition. I want to see who can do the most push-ups, sit-ups, and running without stopping, he explained. Let's find out who's in the best shape in this class. Brandon smiled confidently. He always excelled in physical education classes. He was strong, athletic, and liked to show off his physical superiority. He was sure the new kid wouldn't be a match for him. The class gathered in the gym. The teacher started with push-ups. One by one, the students gave up. 10, 15, 20 push-ups. Brandon kept going steady, performing each movement with precision. But when he looked to the side, he saw that Ethan was still going too, with perfect posture and controlled breathing. 30, 40, 50 push-ups. The other students were all seated by now, watching in awe. Only Brandon and Ethan remained. Sweat dripped down Brandon's face. His arms began to tremble. He glanced at Ethan again, who didn't even seem to be straining. His breathing remained deep and steady, his movements fluid and controlled. At 65, Brandon collapsed to the floor, exhausted. Ethan continued until 70, and only then stopped, not because he was tired, but because the teacher asked him to. Impressive, Ethan, said Mr. Michael, clearly surprised. Where did you learn to have such physical conditioning? My grandfather has been training me since I was little, Ethan replied simply. Brandon watched everything from the floor, still trying to catch his breath. For the first time, he felt something different toward the new kid. It wasn't just irritation anymore, was it? Admiration, respect. He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. His leadership at school was being threatened. The competition continued with sit-ups and running. In every category, Ethan performed exceptionally well, always with that calmness that seemed natural to him. At the end of the class, the other students gathered around him asking questions, impressed with his skills. Do you play any sports? Asked a boy named Noah. I practice martial arts, Ethan answered, since I was 5. Really? What kind of martial art? Emma approached, interested. My grandfather taught me a mix of various techniques. He says what matters isn't the style, but the philosophy behind it. Self-control, discipline, respect. Brandon heard everything from afar, leaning against the gym wall. His friends Tyler and Derek were by his side, also silent. For the first time, Brandon felt small, and he didn't like that feeling one bit. That night, Brandon was alone in his huge, empty house. The housekeeper, Mrs. Nancy, had left dinner ready and gone home. He ate alone in the kitchen, staring at his phone. His mother had sent a message saying she would be late from a meeting. His father was on a business trip in Boston. Brandon went up to his room and lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling. He thought about Ethan, about that irritating serenity, that strength that didn't need shouting or violence to show itself. He thought about the other students, who now looked at the new kid with admiration, the same admiration they used to have for him. On Sunday morning, Brandon's mother was finally home. Jennifer Thompson was an elegant woman, always impeccably dressed, even on weekends. She was in the home office reviewing documents for an important case when the phone rang. "Hello?" she answered, without taking her eyes off the papers. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Principal Margaret Wilson from Brandon's school. We need to talk about your son's behavior." Jennifer sighed heavily. "Principal, I really don't have time for this right now. I have an important hearing tomorrow and need to prepare. Can you email me the details?" "Ma'am, this is serious. Brandon has been intimidating other students. We need an in-person meeting with you and Mr. Thompson." "My husband is traveling," Jennifer replied, already impatient. "Look, you have my authorization to take whatever measures you deem necessary. Apply suspension, whatever is needed. Just send me the documents to sign." "But ma'am," "I'm sorry, but I really have to go." "Have a good week, Principal." Jennifer hung up and turned her attention back to the documents. In her mind, the problem was solved. The school would handle Brandon, she would sign the necessary papers, and everything would go back to normal. She didn't realize that by doing this, she was repeating the same pattern of absence that had turned her son into the school bully. Brandon, who had overheard his mother's conversation from the hallway, felt a familiar pain tighten in his chest. He went back to his room and slammed the door shut. He grabbed a pillow and punched it several times, letting the anger and frustration flow. But even as he hit the pillow, he couldn't get the image of Ethan out of his head, always calm, always in control. On Monday, Brandon returned to school determined to prove he was still the strongest. But something had changed. Ethan was no longer just the new kid. He was the boy who had impressed the whole class in gym. He was the one who didn't get shaken by taunts. During literature class, Ms. Melissa, a young woman passionate about teaching, assigned a partner project about a book they had to read together. "I'll be assigning the partners myself," she announced. "I want you to learn to work with people different from you." When she read out the pairs, Brandon felt his heart sink. Brandon Thompson and Ethan Mitchell. Whispers filled the room. Everyone knew about the rivalry between them. Emma looked at Ethan with worry, but he just nodded that it was okay. After class, Ms. Melissa called them both. "I know you two have had some disagreements," she said, "but I believe you can learn a lot from each other. This project is worth 20% of your semester grade. I expect you to take it seriously." Brandon and Ethan stayed silent. The teacher waited for a response, but when neither said anything, she dismissed them. In the hallway, Brandon stopped Ethan. "Listen here, newbie. I'll do the project alone and put your name on it. I don't want you messing up my grade." "You don't have to do that," Ethan replied calmly. "We can actually work together. Split the tasks." "I don't want to work with you, got it? I'll do it all myself." "Suit yourself," Ethan agreed without arguing. "But if you change your mind, I'm available." Brandon walked away, annoyed. In the following days, he really started working on the project alone. He read the book at night, took notes, prepared the presentation. But something bothered him. It was as if Ethan's absence from the work made everything feel empty, meaningless. A week later, Brandon got to school and realized he had left his part of the project at home. The presentation was that morning and he had no way to go get it. He panicked. If he didn't present, he'd get a 0. That's when Ethan approached him. "Forget something." "None of your business," Brandon replied harshly, but his voice trembled. "The literature project," Ethan asked. "I prepared a part too, just in case. I can present with you if you want." Brandon looked at him suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" "Because we're partners, and partners help each other." That morning they presented together. Ethan had prepared a deep analysis of the book, with interpretations Brandon hadn't even thought of. Ms. Melissa was impressed and gave the pair the highest grade. After class, Brandon was confused. Ethan had saved his grade, even after all the taunts, all the bullying. Why? It didn't make sense in Brandon's head. People weren't like that. People fought back, sought revenge, but Ethan just helped. The project incident made Brandon start observing Ethan more closely, and the more he watched, the more questions popped into his mind. Who was this boy? Where did this inner strength come from? Why did he never fight back? Emma, who had become close friends with Ethan, started telling other people about his martial arts skills. Soon the story spread throughout the school. Everyone wanted to know more about the new student's training. "Is it true you can break boards with your hands?" asked Noah during recess. Ethan smiled. "I could, but I don't see the point. Martial arts aren't about destroying things or hurting people. They're about building inner strength, discipline, and compassion." "But you know how to defend yourself, right?" insisted another boy. "If someone attacks you, can you knock them out?" "I can," Ethan admitted, "but I hope I never have to do that. The best fight is the one you avoid." Brandon listened to everything from afar, leaning against the wall. Every word from Ethan seemed to question everything he believed about strength and power. He always thought being strong meant intimidating others, making them afraid. But Ethan was strong in a completely different way, and that deeply bothered him. That afternoon, Brandon secretly followed Ethan when classes ended. He wanted to find out more about the new student, understand where that serenity came from. He saw Ethan take 2 buses and get off in a neighborhood farther from downtown. He watched from a distance as he entered a small community center. Brandon waited a few minutes and then went in too. He heard voices coming from a back room. He approached slowly and peeked through the window. What he saw left him speechless. Ethan was in the center of a circle of children, all between 6 and 12 years old. They were performing martial arts movements under his guidance. But that wasn't the only thing that caught Brandon's attention. It was the way Ethan interacted with the children, patient, gentle, correcting their movements carefully, encouraging every small progress. "Very good, everyone," Ethan said. "Remember, it's not about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about doing each movement with attention, with respect for yourselves and others." One of the children, a small boy with curly hair, raised his hand. "Ethan, is it true you can fly?" Ethan laughed. "No, little Noah, nobody can fly. But with training and dedication, you can do things that seem impossible. The secret is to never give up." Brandon watched for almost an hour. He saw how the children admired Ethan, how they paid attention to his every word. He felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Envy? Not exactly. It was more like he was seeing something he had always wanted to have, but never knew how to name. When the children's class ended, Brandon quickly hid. He saw Ethan say goodbye to each child individually, with attention and affection. An elderly lady who seemed to work at the community center hugged Ethan gratefully. "You're an angel, my son," she said. "These children have changed so much since your classes started. They're more disciplined, more confident, and the best part is that you do this for free, just out of love." "It's not for free, Mrs. Barbara," Ethan replied. "I receive much more than I give. Every child here teaches me something new every day." Brandon felt a tightness in his chest. When was the last time he had done something for someone without expecting anything in return? When was the last time he felt truly connected to another person? He left the community center before Ethan could see him. He walked through the neighborhood streets, lost in thought. He arrived at a small park and sat on a bench. He took out his phone and looked at the messages. None from his mother, none from his father. Just a few messages from his school friends talking about a party on the weekend. Brandon realized he didn't really know who his friends were. Tyler and Derek were by his side because he was popular, because they were afraid of him. But if he lost that power, would they still be there? Probably not. He thought of Ethan, surrounded by those children, teaching, helping, being admired, not for the fear he caused, but for the good he did. And for the first time in a long while, Brandon felt like crying. The following Tuesday, Brandon arrived at school determined to change. He didn't know exactly how, But he wanted to be different. He wanted to be better. But changes aren't easy, and old habits die hard. During recess, Brandon saw Ethan talking with Emma near the water fountains. He approached without thinking too much. "Can I talk to you?" he asked Ethan. Emma looked surprised, but Ethan just nodded yes. "Of course." They moved away a bit. Brandon wasn't sure where to start. I saw you at the community center," he finally admitted. "I was following you. Sorry about that." Ethan didn't seem upset. "It's okay. What did you think?" I thought it was amazing," Brandon confessed, and there was sincerity in his voice. "The way you teach those kids, how they admire you." "You could do the same," Ethan said. "There's a lot of good in you, Brandon. I can see that." Brandon let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of doing. I do know. I know you're strong, brave. I know you have a brilliant mind when you want to use it. I saw that in the literature assignment. You just need to channel those qualities into something positive." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Brandon fell silent, processing the words. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. No one had ever seen anything good in him beyond his physical strength or his social status. "Why are you like this?" Brandon suddenly asked. "Why don't you hate me? Why do you help me?" Ethan thought for a moment. "My grandfather always says that everyone is fighting battles we can't see, that behind every difficult person there's a story of pain. I don't know what your story is, Brandon, but I know there must be a reason why you act the way you do." Those words pierced the armor Brandon had built around his heart. He felt his eyes sting, but blinked quickly to hold back the tears. He couldn't cry there in front of everyone. "My parents," he began, his voice coming out low and shaky. "They're never home. When they are, they don't really see me. I'm just one more thing they have to manage, like their businesses, their meetings. Sometimes I do wrong things just to see if they notice, but not even that works." Ethan put a hand on Brandon's shoulder in a gesture of understanding. "I get it. That must be really hard." "You don't get it," Brandon retorted, but without aggression. "You have a grandfather who teaches you, who spends time with you. You have someone who cares." "That's true," Ethan admitted. "And my grandfather taught me that other people's pain doesn't lessen our own. Everyone carries their own weight. Yours isn't smaller just because I have mine too." Brandon looked at Ethan with curiosity. "You have pain? You don't seem like it." "Everyone does," Ethan replied, and for the first time his voice carried a deep sadness. "The difference is how we choose to deal with it." Before Brandon could ask more, the bell rang. They returned to the classroom, but something had changed between them. They weren't friends yet, but maybe they weren't enemies anymore. In the following days, Brandon began to observe more and speak less. He paid attention to how Ethan interacted with the other students, always kind, always willing to help. He saw how he never spoke ill of anyone, how he always found something positive to say. One morning, Brandon woke up to a text message from his mother on his phone. She wouldn't be able to make it to his school presentation that afternoon, something about an urgent case in court. It was the third time in a row that she had missed an important school event. Her father was still traveling, this time in Seattle, dealing with problems at a company branch. Brandon sat on his bed and looked at his phone. He thought about replying with something bitter, but simply left the message on read. What was the point? They wouldn't change. At school during history class, Mr. William proposed a different activity. "I want each of you to prepare a 5-minute presentation about someone you consider a personal hero. It could be a famous person, a family member, a friend, someone who truly inspires you." The students started talking among themselves about who they would choose. Emma decided to talk about her grandmother, who had survived cancer. Noah chose a famous soccer player. Others talked about musicians, actors, activists. Ethan stayed quiet for a while, thinking. When it was his turn to announce his choice, everyone expected him to talk about his grandfather, but he surprised them all. "I'm going to talk about Brandon Thompson," he said. Silence fell over the classroom. Brandon looked at him in disbelief. Everyone stared. Even Mr. Williams seemed surprised. "Ethan," the teacher said, "are you sure? Is this your final choice?" Yes, Ethan confirmed. Brandon felt his face turn red. He didn't know if it was from shame, anger, or confusion. After class, he ran after Ethan in the hallway. What was that? He demanded to know. Is this some kind of joke? Do you want to humiliate me in front of everyone? It's not a joke, Ethan replied sincerely. And I don't want to humiliate you. I want to speak the truth about what I see in you. And what do you see? Brandon asked, genuinely curious. I see someone strong who's using their strength the wrong way. I see someone with deep pain who doesn't know how to express it. I see someone who could make such a difference in the world if they chose a different path. Brandon was speechless. No one had ever described him that way. Not even he thought of himself like that. The following week, the day of the presentations arrived. One by one, the students went to the front of the class and talked about their heroes. Some presentations were moving, others were fun, but everyone was eager to see what Ethan would say about Brandon. When it was his turn, Ethan walked calmly to the front of the room. Brandon was tense at his desk, not knowing what to expect. I chose to talk about Brandon Thompson, Ethan began. Many of you must be wondering why. Brandon isn't perfect. He's made mistakes, hurt people, including me, but I see him as a potential hero because I see his strength. Brandon swallowed hard, trying to hold back the emotion rising in his chest. Brandon is strong, not just physically, but emotionally, Ethan continued. He faces every day the pain of feeling alone, of having absent parents, of not getting the love and attention he deserves. And yet, he comes to school, gets good grades, leads people. That takes tremendous strength. Tears started to stream down Brandon's face. He tried to hide them but couldn't. I admire Brandon because he has the potential to use all that strength for something amazing, Ethan said. He can choose to keep hurting others because he's hurt, or he can choose to transform his pain into something that helps people. And I believe he will choose the second path. That's why he's my hero. Because I believe in what he can become. Brandon couldn't take it anymore. He abruptly got up from his desk and ran out of the classroom, tears now flowing freely. He ran through the halls until he found the bathroom. He locked himself in one of the stalls and cried like he hadn't cried in years. All the repressed pain, all the loneliness, all the anger and frustration came out in that cry. He punched the stall wall, then leaned his forehead against it, letting the tears fall. He didn't know how long he had been there. It could have been minutes or hours. When he finally calmed down, he heard footsteps entering the bathroom. He held his breath, hoping whoever it was would leave quickly. "Brandon?" It was Ethan's voice. "I know you're in there. I can stay out here if you want. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know you're not alone." Brandon heard the sound of Ethan sitting on the bathroom floor, on the other side of the stall door. For a few minutes, they stayed silent. Then, slowly, Brandon opened the door and sat on the floor too, beside Ethan. "Why did you do that?" Brandon asked, his voice still hoarse from crying. "I was awful to you, since the first day." "Because I know you're not that kid who poured juice on my head," Ethan answered. "That's just a character you created to survive the pain, but behind him there's someone better. And I wanted you and everyone else to know that." Brandon wiped the tears from his face. "How do you do that? How are you so balanced?" "I'm not always," Ethan admitted. "Sometimes I feel anger, sadness, frustration too. The difference is, my grandfather taught me to observe these feelings without letting them control me. It's like learning to surf the waves of emotions instead of being dragged by them." "Your grandfather must be an amazing person," Brandon said. Ethan's expression turned serious, sad. "Yeah, he's the most important person in my life." Brandon noticed the change in his tone. "Is something wrong?" Ethan hesitated. Until then, he hadn't told anyone at school. But looking at Brandon, he saw someone who also carried deep pain, and sharing pain is sometimes the first step toward healing it. "My grandfather is sick," Ethan confessed, his voice trembling. "Very sick. The doctors said he doesn't have much time. That's why I came to live here in Chicago with my grandmother, to be close to the hospital where he's staying." It was Brandon's turn to be shocked. All that time, he had seen Ethan as someone invincible, without problems, without pain, but he was wrong. Ethan carried a burden as heavy as his, maybe even heavier. "I'm sorry," Brandon said, and he meant it. "I didn't know." "It's okay. I don't tell people because I don't want them to feel sorry for me. My grandfather always said life is full of difficult moments, but we have to get through them with dignity." Brandon felt a connection with Ethan that he had never felt with anyone. There, sitting on the floor of that school bathroom, two boys who seemed so different discovered that deep down they were very similar. Both were dealing with loss, with pain, with emptiness they didn't know how to fill. "Can I meet your grandfather?" Brandon asked suddenly. Ethan looked at him surprised. "Really? Really? If he's as special as you say, I'd like to meet him, while it's still possible." Ethan smiled, and it was a sad but genuine smile. "He'll like you. My grandfather always says he can see people's hearts, not just their actions." That weekend, Ethan took Brandon to meet his grandfather at the hospital. Master Henry Mitchell was in a bed on the 5th floor, connected to various tubes and monitors. But when he saw the two boys enter, his face lit up with a smile. "Ethan, my grandson," he said, his voice weak but full of affection. "And you brought a friend." "Grandpa, this is Brandon. He goes to school with me." Master Henry extended his trembling hand to Brandon, who shook it carefully, afraid of hurting him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, young man," the elderly man said. "My grandson told me about you." Brandon looked at Ethan, surprised. "He did?" "Of course," Master Henry continued. "He told me there was a boy at school who was fighting his own demons, that he was strong, but using his strength the wrong way. I was happy to hear you two are getting closer. Sometimes the most unlikely friendships are the most transformative." Brandon sat in the chair next to the bed. There was something about Master Henry that inspired trust, a peace that emanated from him even amidst the suffering of his illness. "Sir," Brandon began hesitantly, "Ethan told me that you taught martial arts your whole life. How did you manage to stay calm in every situation?" I can't. Anything sets me off." Master Henry smiled wisely. "Anger, my boy, is just fear in disguise. When you feel angry, ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Afraid of not being seen, of not being loved, of not being important?" The words hit Brandon like a punch. That was exactly it. All his aggressive behavior came from the fear of not being important enough to his parents, of not deserving attention. "And how do I stop being afraid?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "You don't," Master Henry replied. "The fear will always be there. But you can learn to dance with it instead of fighting it. You can recognize the fear, thank it for wanting to protect you, and then choose to act with courage anyway." Brandon fell silent, absorbing those words. Ethan watched the interaction with a sad smile. He knew these might be some of his grandfather's final teachings, and he was grateful to be able to share them with someone. They spent the entire afternoon at the hospital. Master Henry told stories about when he trained athletes, about his travels across the United States teaching martial arts, about how he met his wife, Ethan's grandmother. He talked about philosophy, about life, about the importance of finding purpose even in the most difficult moments. When they finally said their goodbyes, Brandon felt that something had changed inside him. It was as if a seed had been planted in his heart, something that would still grow and blossom. "Thank you for bringing me here," he said to Ethan on the way back. "Your grandfather is truly special." "I know," Ethan replied, wiping away an escaping tear. "And I'm afraid of losing him. I don't know how I'll manage to go on without him." Brandon put his hand on Ethan's shoulder, mimicking the gesture his friend had made with him so many times. "You will manage, and you won't be alone. I'll be here." It was the first time Brandon had called Ethan a friend, even without using the word, and both felt the meaning of that promise. The following Monday, something incredible happened at school. Brandon arrived early and, instead of going to his usual group, sat next to Ethan in the courtyard. Tyler and Derek watched from a distance, confused, but didn't dare approach. "I've been thinking," Brandon said to Ethan, "about what your grandfather said about finding purpose, and I wanted to know if you'd let me go with you to the community center. Not to train, just to observe more. Maybe learn something." Ethan smiled. "Of course. The kids will love to meet you." That afternoon, Brandon went to the community center with Ethan. He stood in the corner watching the class. He saw how patient Ethan was with each child, how he corrected their movements without criticizing, how he encouraged without flattering. It was a kind of leadership Brandon had never seen before. At the end of the class, one of the children, a small boy with big eyes, approached Brandon. "Are you Ethan's friend?" the boy asked. "I am," Brandon replied and realized it was true. "Then you must be cool too," the boy concluded with the simple logic of children. Brandon felt something stir in his chest. When was the last time someone had called him cool, without it being out of fear or to get something from him? Mrs. Barbara, the woman who ran the community center, approached Brandon. "You have a kind look, young man," she said, "hidden behind a lot of pain, but kind. I know how to recognize it, because I've seen many boys like you. Life hasn't been easy, has it?" Brandon shook his head, not trusting his own voice. "Well, know that it's never too late to choose a different path," continued Mrs. Barbara. "Ethan told me about you, and the simple fact that you're here today already shows there's much more to you than you think." Those kind words broke something inside Brandon. He wasn't used to kindness. He was used to criticism, to demands, to indifference. But kindness? That was new, and it hurt in a good way. In the following weeks, Brandon started going regularly to the community center. At first he just observed, but gradually began to help. He organized the mats before classes, distributed water to the children, arranged the equipment. Small tasks, but they made him feel useful. The children started liking him. Brandon discovered he had a knack for making children laugh, for inventing games that incorporated the exercises. Ethan watched everything with satisfaction, seeing the transformation happen before his eyes. At school, the other students noticed the change in Brandon. He didn't stop being popular, but his popularity now came from a different place. Instead of fear, people felt genuine respect. Instead of avoiding him, they started approaching him. Emma commented to Ethan one day during break, "I don't know what you did with Brandon, but he's completely different. He even helped Lily with math yesterday." Lily, the same girl whose books he threw on the floor last week. Ethan smiled. "I didn't do anything. Brandon just remembered who he really is. But not everything was perfect. Brandon still had moments of relapse. Sometimes when anger or frustration became too strong, he reverted to old patterns. Once he pushed a younger boy in the hallway for no apparent reason. Ethan confronted him afterward. "What happened there?" Brandon lowered his head in shame. "I don't know, I just lost control." "Why?" Brandon thought before answering. "My dad called this morning. Said he'll be traveling for 2 more weeks. It's been almost a month since I've seen him. And my mom barely leaves the office. When I tried to talk to her yesterday, she completely ignored me. And you took it out on the other boy," Ethan completed. "Yes," Brandon admitted. "I know it's wrong, but in the moment, I just wanted to make someone feel how I feel." "I understand," Ethan said, "but hurting others won't heal your pain. It'll only create more pain in the world. My grandfather always said that healing comes from turning our pain into compassion for others." Brandon sighed heavily. "It's hard. Sometimes it seems easier to go back to who I was before." "I know," Ethan agreed. "Change is hard, but you're not alone in this. When you feel like you're going to lose control, come find me, or go to the community center, or do some of the breathing exercises I taught you. But don't give up on becoming the person I know you can be." Brandon looked at his friend with gratitude. "How are you so patient with me?" "Because I know you're worth it," Ethan replied simply. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The months went by. Brandon continued his journey of transformation with ups and downs, victories and relapses. But each day got a little easier. Each day he understood Master Henry's teachings a little better. Ethan continued visiting his grandfather regularly at the hospital, and Brandon always accompanied him. The three developed a deep bond. Master Henry had become a father figure to Brandon, filling a void he didn't even know he had. One day, Master Henry called the 2 boys for a serious conversation. "My boys," he said, his voice weaker than ever. "I need to tell you something important." Ethan and Brandon approached the bed, concerned. "The doctors told me I don't have much time left," the master continued. "Maybe weeks, maybe days. I've already made peace with it. I've lived a long and meaningful life. But I need you to make me a promise." "Anything, Grandpa," Ethan said, holding his grandfather's hand. "I want you to continue the work I started, to teach other children, other young people, to spread the values of discipline, respect, and compassion. The world needs this now more than ever." "I promise," Ethan said, tears already falling. "I promise too," Brandon added, his voice choked up. Master Henry smiled, a calm and serene smile. "You two are proof that people can change, that kindness can transform lives. Brandon, you arrived here a few months ago as a lost, hurt boy. Today I see a young man who is finding his way, who is using his strength to help instead of hurt. I'm proud of you." Brandon began to cry openly. No one had ever said they were proud of him. Not his parents, not his teachers, no one. "And Ethan," the master continued, "my dear grandson, you've always been special. Since you were little, you've shown an old, wise soul. But remember, being strong doesn't mean never feeling pain. When I'm gone, it will hurt, and that's okay. Allow yourself to feel, to cry, to suffer, but don't let the pain harden you. Let it soften you, make you even more compassionate." "I'll miss you," Ethan managed to say between sobs. "And I'll miss you," Master Henry admitted. "But remember, death is not the end. It's just a transformation. I'll always be with you, in every lesson I gave, in every value I planted in your hearts. Every time you help someone, I'll be there. Every time you choose compassion over anger, I'll be there." The three of them hugged for a long time, crying, saying words of love and gratitude. Mrs. Evelyn, Ethan's grandmother, watched from the doorway with a broken heart, but also full of pride for the husband who had touched so many lives. 3 days later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Master Henry Mitchell passed away peacefully. Ethan was holding his hand when he took his last breath, a peaceful sigh like someone who could finally rest after a long journey. The news spread quickly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. Ethan stayed home in the days before, immersed in his pain. Mrs. Evelyn cared for him with love but respected his moments of silence. Brandon visited him every day after school. He didn't say much, just stayed there, present. Sometimes they sat in silence in Ethan's room. Other times Brandon told silly stories from school, trying to get a smile out of his friend. And other times he just held Ethan while his friend cried. On the day of the funeral, the small neighborhood church was packed, not just with family and friends, but with dozens of people Master Henry had touched throughout his life. Former students, parents of children he had trained, people he had helped in some way. Ethan was in the front row next to his grandmother, wearing a black suit that seemed too big on him. His face was pale, his eyes red from crying so much. But there was also a serenity in him, as if he were trying to honor his grandfather's teachings, even in the midst of pain. Brandon was sitting right behind, along with Emma and other friends from school. His mother, Jennifer, had finally made time to accompany him, shocked by the news and realizing how much that man had meant to her son. During the ceremony, several people stood up to share memories of Master Henry. They spoke of his kindness, his wisdom, his ability to see the best in people. Each story touched those present deeply. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he walked to the altar with trembling legs. He looked at his grandfather's coffin, took a deep breath, and began. "My grandfather," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "He was the wisest man I ever knew. He taught me that true strength isn't in the muscles but in the heart. That being brave isn't about not having fear but about acting despite the fear. That the greatest victory isn't defeating an enemy but turning an enemy into a friend." Ethan looked at Brandon, who nodded encouragingly. "In the last weeks of his life, my grandfather did exactly that. He helped turn someone who could have been my enemy into my best friend. And by doing so, he saved 2 lives, my friends and mine. Because having Brandon by my side in this impossible moment is what gives me the strength to move forward." Tears were now streaming freely down Ethan's face. "Grandpa, I promise to honor everything you taught me. I promise to continue your legacy. I promise to be the best version of myself, not just for me, but for all the people you touched. Because you showed us that a life well lived isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give to others. When Ethan returned to his seat, it was Brandon who supported him. Their embrace was that of brothers, of souls who found each other at the right time and saved one another. After the ceremony, in the small cemetery where Master Henry was buried, something unexpected happened. Children from the community centre started arriving, brought by Mrs. Barbara and other volunteers. They formed a circle around the grave and, one by one, performed martial arts moves that Ethan had taught them. It was a silent, powerful tribute. Each movement was executed with perfection, with respect, with love. Tears streamed down the faces of the adults present. It was impossible not to be moved by that demonstration. At the end, all the children bowed as a sign of respect. Little Noah, the smallest of them, approached Ethan and handed him a drawing. It was a picture of Master Henry smiling, surrounded by children. "He'll always be with us," the boy said, with the conviction only children possess. Ethan hugged the boy, unable to speak, just feeling the wave of love and gratitude emanating from everyone there. The following days were difficult. Ethan returned to school, but it was as if a part of him had stayed behind. He was still kind, still helped others, but there was a sadness in his eyes that wouldn't disappear. Brandon started keeping a close watch on him. He sat next to him in class, ate lunch with him in the cafeteria, went with him to the community center. Not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared. One day during break, Ethan finally opened up. "I don't know if I can do this without him," he confessed to Brandon. "Continuing the classes at the community center, living by his teachings. It feels too heavy." Brandon thought carefully before answering. "Your grandfather didn't expect you to do it alone. He knew you'd have help. And you do. You have me. You have Mrs. Barbara. You have your grandmother. You have all those kids who admire you. And above all, you have all the love and wisdom he planted in you over the years. No one can take that away." "But what if I'm not good enough?" Ethan questioned. "What if I can't honor his memory?" "You already are," Brandon assured. "Every day that you choose to be kind even when you're hurting, every time you help someone even when it's hard to help yourself, that's honoring his memory. Your grandfather didn't want you to be perfect. He wanted you to be human." Those words touched Ethan deeply. Brandon had learned Master Henry's lessons well, and now he was giving back all the support he had received. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan began to heal. The pain never completely disappeared, but he learned to carry it more lightly. He learned that he could feel sadness and joy at the same time. That could remember his grandfather, with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. Brandon also continued his transformation. The more he supported Ethan, the more he found purpose in his own life. He began to seriously dedicate himself to classes at the community center, no longer as an observer but as a co-instructor alongside Ethan. His mother, Jennifer, finally started paying attention. Master Henry's funeral had been a wake-up call for her. Seeing how that man had impacted so many lives, especially her sons, made her question her own priorities. She began turning down some cases at the office to spend more time at home. She started having dinner with Brandon, asking about his day, really listening to his answers. It wasn't perfect, and they still had much to rebuild, but it was a start. Brandon's father also began to notice his absence. On one of the rare nights he was home, he and Brandon had a long, honest conversation. "Son," his father, Robert Thompson, began, "I've failed you. I thought giving money, paying for a good school, buying things, was enough. But it's not, is it?" Brandon shook his head. "I don't want your things, Dad. I want you. I want you to be present, to know who my friends are, what I like to do, what scares me, what makes me happy." Robert felt a lump in his throat. When had his son grown so much? When had he become this mature and articulate young man? "Give me a chance to get to know the real you," Robert asked. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to try. I don't want to look back years from now and realize I missed the chance to be a real father to you." "Okay, Dad," Brandon replied, "but it has to be real. It's no use promising and then disappearing again." "I promise," Robert said, and this time it was a promise he intended to keep. The change at home reflected in all aspects of Brandon's life. He became even more confident, more secure. His transformation was almost complete. but one important step remained. One day, Brandon gathered his courage and went to Principal Margaret. "Principal," he said, "I'd like to apologize, formally, for all my behavior since I came to this school, for the people I hurt, for the times I caused trouble, and I'd like to know if there's anything I can do to repair the damage." Margaret looked at the boy in front of her and could hardly believe it was the same Brandon Thompson who had arrived at the beginning of the year. "Brandon," she said with a smile, "the simple fact that you're here, apologizing, already shows how much you've changed. But if you really want to do something, I have a suggestion." "Anything," Brandon replied promptly. "We have some younger students who are struggling, both with studies and behavior. Would you and Ethan like to create a mentorship program? Help these boys before they go down the same path you almost did?" Brandon's eyes lit up. "We'd love to, thank you for trusting me, Principal." "You've earned that trust," Margaret replied. "And Brandon, I always knew you had potential for amazing things. You just needed someone to help you see that in yourself." Brandon left the principal's office with a full heart. He ran to tell Ethan about the mentorship program. The two got excited, planning how they could help other young people. "Your grandfather would be proud," Brandon told Ethan. "He'd be proud of both of us," Ethan corrected. The mentorship program was a success from the start. Brandon and Ethan met twice a week with a group of 5 younger boys, all with behavior problems or learning difficulties. They not only helped with homework, but also taught emotional control techniques, discipline, and respect. One of the boys, named Jason, was especially difficult. He reminded Brandon so much of his old self, aggressive, closed off, resistant to any attempt at help. But Brandon saw in him an opportunity to repay everything he had received. "Jason," Brandon said after a particularly difficult session, "I know how you feel. I know anger seems like your only weapon against a world that hurts you. But I can show you a different path, if you let me." "Why do you care?" Jason questioned with hostility. "Because someone cared about me when I needed it most," Brandon answered honestly. "And that saved my life. Now it's my turn to do the same for you." It took time, but Jason began to open up. Just as Brandon had done with Ethan, he began to trust, to try new ways of dealing with his emotions. And the cycle of transformation continued. The months went by. The whole school noticed the change, not just in Brandon, but in the overall atmosphere. There was less bullying, more cooperation, more kindness. The example set by the 2 boys had inspired others. Emma, who had witnessed the entire journey, commented one day, "You too changed this school. Before, everyone was afraid to come here. Now, it feels like a place where people really care about each other." "It wasn't just us," Ethan replied humbly. "It was the example my grandfather left, and that every person here chose to follow." On the 1-year anniversary of Master Henry's passing, the community center organized a special tribute. Ethan and Brandon, along with all the children who trained, performed a martial arts demonstration. But it wasn't just about the movements. It was about the philosophy, the values, the legacy. Mrs. Evelyn, Ethan's grandmother, watched with tears in her eyes. Seeing how her husband's work continued to live on through her grandson and so many other children was the greatest honor she could imagine. "Henry would be so proud," she told Ethan afterward. "You took everything he taught you and multiplied it. That is the greatest gift you could give him." Ethan hugged his grandmother tightly. "I miss him every day, Grandma." "I do too, my love," she replied. "But he is here, in you, in Brandon, in each one of these children. As long as his values are alive in you, he will never truly be gone." As time passed, Ethan and Brandon became inseparable. They were more than friends. They were chosen brothers united by a journey of pain and transformation. Together, they created an impact that went far beyond the school or the community center. They started a social media channel where they shared teachings about martial arts and philosophy. It wasn't about fighting techniques, but about personal development, emotional control, overcoming trauma. The videos went viral, reaching thousands of young people across the United States. Messages came in every day, boys and girls telling how the videos had helped them deal with bullying, depression, difficult family situations. Each message was a reminder that Master Henry's legacy continued to grow. In their senior year of high school, the time came to decide about the future. Ethan wanted to study physical education and psychology. Brandon decided to follow the same path. Both had a dream, to create an academy that was more than just a place to train. They wanted to create a space for transformation, where young people could find purpose, discipline, and community. On graduation day, the school was decorated with great care. Entire families were present to celebrate. Jennifer and Robert Thompson sat in the front row, finally present and involved in their son's life. Brandon's transformation had transformed the whole family. When it was time for the speeches, Brandon was the one chosen to represent the class. He went up on stage, looked at the audience full of familiar faces, and began. "When I arrived at this school," he said, his voice firm and clear, "I was a lost boy. I used anger and violence as a shield against the pain I felt inside. I thought being strong meant making others fear me. I was completely wrong." He paused, looking at Ethan among the graduates. "It took a newcomer, someone who had every reason to hate me, to show me what true strength is. Ethan Mitchell didn't retaliate against my provocations with violence. He responded with something much more powerful, compassion, and in doing so, he saved my life." Tears began to stream down the faces of many people in the audience. "But Ethan didn't do it alone," Brandon continued. "He had a master, his grandfather Henry, who taught us that we are all fighting invisible battles, that behind every difficult person there is a story of pain, and that the only way to break this cycle is to choose to understand instead of judge, to help instead of hurt." Brandon looked to where Mrs. Evelyn was seated. "Master Henry is no longer with us physically, but his spirit lives on in every life he touched. It lives in me, in Ethan, in all the children at the community center, in every person at this school who decided to choose kindness over cruelty." He paused, taking a deep breath. "So my message to all of you today is this. Do not underestimate the power of an act of compassion. We don't know what battles the people around us are facing. An act of kindness may seem small to you, but it could be exactly what saves someone's life. That's what happened to me." Brandon ended his speech with a quote that Master Henry used to say, "True strength isn't about defeating others, but about helping them get back up. May we all have the courage to be strong in that way." The applause was deafening. People standing, clapping, crying. Brandon returned to his place beside Ethan, who hugged him tightly. "Your grandfather would be proud," Brandon whispered. "He is proud," Ethan replied, "and I am too. Of you, of us, of everything we've achieved together." The ceremony continued, but that moment remained etched in everyone's memory. It was living proof that people can change, that it's never too late to choose a better path, that kindness is contagious and transformative. After the graduation, there was a reception in the school courtyard. Ethan and Brandon were surrounded by friends and family when Principal Margaret approached. "You too?" she said with a smile. "You need to know something. Remember the first day, Brandon, when you spilled juice on Ethan?" They both nodded yes. "I was watching from a distance," she revealed, "and I almost stepped in, but something made me stop. Do you know why?" They shook their heads. "Because 3 months before that day, Ethan had saved my mother from a mugging. I recognized him immediately, and I saw the same calm, the same control he showed in that dangerous situation. I wanted to see how he would handle the bullying, and I was amazed." Ethan was surprised. "I didn't know you knew." "I did," Margaret confirmed, "and from the first day I knew you were special. But I never imagined your presence here would transform not just Brandon, but the entire school. You two taught me that sometimes the best intervention is to trust in people's potential to do what's right." It was an unexpected revelation, but it made perfect sense. Everything was connected from the start. The meeting between Ethan and Brandon wasn't chance, but part of something bigger. The following years were filled with hard work and dedication. Ethan and Brandon went to college, studying together, supporting each other through the difficulties of adulthood. They continued the work at the community center, now with even more knowledge and tools to help. Mrs. Evelyn became a constant figure of support, offering wisdom whenever needed. Jennifer and Robert Thompson became active volunteers at the center, using their resources and connections to expand the project. The family had finally found a common purpose. Jason, the troubled boy they had mentored, grew up and became one of the center's most dedicated assistants. His transformation was another testament to the power of what Ethan and Brandon were building. On a warm Saturday afternoon, 5 years after graduation, Ethan and Brandon stood on the property they had managed to rent for their own academy. It was small, but it was theirs. It was still empty, just walls and a cement floor, but it was full of possibilities. "We did it," Brandon said, looking around in awe. "We're going to make our dream come true." "My grandfather's dream," Ethan corrected, "which became our dream." They began planning every detail. It wouldn't just be a martial arts academy. It would be a full community space, with classes in different disciplines, psychological support, mentorship, personal development programs. A place where young people could come not only to train their bodies, but to strengthen their minds and spirits. "What are we going to call it?" Brandon asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled. "Master Henry Academy. Legacy of Transformation." "Perfect," Brandon agreed. They worked tirelessly over the following months. They painted the walls, installed equipment, created the programs. Mrs. Evelyn sewed the uniforms. Jennifer helped with all the legal and bureaucratic aspects. Robert used his business connections to secure sponsors. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in August. They expected maybe 50 people. More than 200 showed up. Children from the community center, former schoolmates, parents, teachers, people who had been touched in some way by the work of the two. And there was Emma, who now worked as a journalist and had written a beautiful article about Ethan and Brandon's journey. Robert, Tyler, and Derek, who had become true friends over the years. Jason and other young people who had been mentored. Mrs. Barbara from the community center. Ms. Melissa and Mr. Michael. During the opening ceremony, Ethan and Brandon stood side by side in front of the academy. "6 years ago," Ethan began, "I was a new kid just trying to survive my first day of school. I got a cup of juice poured on my head and could have reacted with anger. But my grandfather taught me differently. He taught me that every act of aggression comes from a place of pain, and that the only way to break that cycle is with compassion." Brandon continued, "And 6 years ago I was the kid who poured that juice. I was lost, hurt, using violence as a way to ask for help without knowing it. Ethan could have hated me, avoided me, reported me. But he chose to see me, to really see me, and that changed everything." They looked at each other, then back at the crowd. "This academy isn't just ours," Ethan said. "It belongs to everyone who believes that people can change, that it's never too late to choose a better path. That true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." "Let's dedicate this space," Brandon added, "to everyone who is struggling, everyone who feels lost, everyone who needs a second chance. The doors are open. We won't turn our backs on anyone, no matter where they come from or what they've done, because someone didn't turn their back on us when we needed it most." The applause was warm and long. Children ran to hug them. Parents thanked them with tears in their eyes. It was a moment of celebration, but also of reflection on the journey that had brought them there. Mrs. Evelyn approached the two, holding a small box. "This belonged to my Henry," she said, handing the box to Ethan. "He kept it his whole life. He said that one day I would know who to give it to." Ethan opened the box carefully. Inside were 2 simple bracelets made of braided leather. On each, engraved words, "Strength in compassion" on one, and "Courage in kindness" on the other. "He made these bracelets over 40 years ago," Mrs. Evelyn explained. "He always said he was waiting for 2 special people to give them to. Now I know you are those people." Ethan and Brandon put on the bracelets, moved. It was as if Master Henry was there with them, blessing this new beginning. The academy prospered beyond all expectations. In the first year, they served over 100 young people. In the second, more than 300. The stories of transformation multiplied. Young people who arrived lost, aggressive, without hope, and left with purpose, direction, dreams. Ethan and Brandon became references in education through sports and personal development. They gave talks in schools, were interviewed on podcasts, wrote articles, but they never lost the essence of what they did. Every child who walked through the academy's door received the same attention, the same care, the same compassion, that had transformed their own lives. There were difficult moments, of course, financial problems when sponsorships were delayed, particularly challenging young people who tested their patience, days when the longing for Master Henry was almost unbearable, but they always had each other. And that made all the difference. One night, after a particularly tiring day, Ethan and Brandon were sitting in the Academy's small office reviewing papers. "Do you think we really make a difference?" Brandon suddenly asked. "Or are we just putting band-aids on wounds that need surgery?" Ethan thought before answering. "Remember what my grandfather used to say, that we can't save the whole world, but we can change one person's world. And that one transformed person can transform others. It's a domino effect. We don't have to fix everything by ourselves. We just need to plant the seeds and trust that they will grow. Sometimes I wonder," Brandon continued, "if on that first day, when I spilled the juice on you, you had reacted differently. If you had yelled, fought back, reported me, where would I be today?" "Probably in the same place we were destined to be," Ethan replied, "just by a different path. My grandfather always said that people find their destiny one way or another. The difference is how much they suffer in the process." Brandon smiled. "Your wisdom is becoming more and more like his." "That's the greatest compliment you could give me," Ethan said sincerely. The years kept passing. The Academy grew. They managed to buy the land and expand the facilities. They opened a second unit in another neighborhood. They created a scholarship program for at-risk youth. They formed partnerships with public schools. The impact multiplied exponentially. When Ethan turned 25, he and Brandon organized a special event. They invited all the young people who had passed through the Academy over the years. More than 500 people showed up. During the event, they projected a video with testimonials from various students. Each one told how the Academy had changed their life. There were stories of overcoming bullying, depression, impossible family situations, stories of young people who had found purpose, direction, hope. One of the testimonials was from a boy named Kevin, who had arrived at the Academy 3 years earlier completely closed off and aggressive. "I was exactly like Brandon was before," said Kevin in the video. "I used anger to hide my pain. But Ethan and Brandon didn't give up on me. Even when I was horrible to them, when I pushed everyone away, they stayed there. And eventually, your walls come down. Because it's impossible to keep hating when someone keeps showing you love." Another testimony was from Olivia, a girl who had suffered severe bullying at school and was on the verge of giving up on everything. "When I first arrived here," she said, "I didn't believe anyone could see me as anything other than a victim. But Ethan and Brandon taught me that I'm not defined by what happened to me, but by how I choose to respond to it. They taught me that I am strong, and for the first time in my life, I believed it." There were dozens of testimonials like this, each one a living proof of the power of compassion, patience, and unconditional love. At the end of the video, an old photo of Master Henry appeared, smiling, surrounded by students. "It all started with one man," Mrs. Evelyn's voice narrated over the image. "A man who believed that martial arts weren't about fighting, but about building character. He planted a seed in his grandson. That seed grew and became a tree. And now that tree is bearing fruit that feeds an entire forest of hope." There wasn't a dry eye in the hall when the video ended. Ethan stepped onto the stage, too emotional to speak at first. Brandon stood by his side, also struggling to maintain his composure. "My grandfather," Ethan finally managed to say, "used to tell me a story about a person walking on the beach, throwing starfish back into the ocean one by one. Someone asked, 'Why are you doing this? There are thousands. You can't make a difference.' And the person replied while tossing another starfish back into the sea, 'I made a difference to this one.' He looked out at the entire audience. 'Each one of you is a starfish returned to the ocean, and together you're going to make a difference for other starfish, and those will make a difference for others. And my grandfather's legacy will continue infinitely, touching lives he never imagined reaching." The applause was thunderous and prolonged. It was a moment celebrating not just the success of the Academy, but the proof that kindness multiplies, that transformation is possible, that it's never too late to choose a different path. After the event, many of the former students approached Ethan and Brandon to talk. They shared about their lives, their jobs, their families. Some had become teachers, others worked in social organizations, others were simply better people in their circles. A former student named William, who now worked as a school psychologist, pulled Brandon aside. "Do you know why I chose this profession?" he asked. Brandon shook his head. "Because of you," William revealed. "Because you showed me that the most difficult people are the ones who need help the most. That behind aggression lies pain, that our response to that pain defines everything. Now I work with troubled teenagers, and every time I want to give up on someone, I remember your story. And I persist." Brandon hugged the young man, deeply moved. That was it. That was exactly it. The domino effect continued. As the night went on, Ethan and Brandon found a moment to be alone on the rooftop of the building where the event was held. They looked out at the starry sky of Chicago, each lost in their own thoughts. "Do you think your grandfather would be proud?" Brandon asked. "I'm sure of it," Ethan replied without hesitation. "Not because of the Academy's success or the number of people we've helped, but because of the choice we make every day to keep being compassionate, patient, loving, even when it's hard." "I never thank you enough," Brandon said suddenly, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." "You don't need to thank me," Ethan replied. "You'd do the same for me. In fact, you already have. When my grandfather passed away, when I thought I couldn't go on, you were there. We saved each other, Brandon. That's what true friendship does." They stayed there for a while longer, two chosen brothers united by a journey that began with a spilled glass of juice and transformed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Today, 10 years after that first day of school, the Master Henry Academy is a national benchmark in youth development through martial arts. Ethan and Brandon, now in their early 20s, continue leading the project with the same passion as day one. But if you ask them what their greatest pride is, they won't talk about awards, recognitions, or numbers. They'll talk about the shy boy who finally found the courage to make friends, about the girl who was thinking of giving up on everything and now smiles every day, about the aggressive teenager who learned to channel his emotions in healthy ways. They'll talk about every individual life they've had the honor of touching, because in the end, that's what it's all about. Not grand gestures or monumental changes, but daily choices to see the best in people, to reach out when it would be easier to turn away, to believe in the possibility of transformation even when it seems impossible. And all of this started because a new boy, on his first day of school, chose not to retaliate when he got juice poured on his head. He chose compassion over anger. He chose to see a lost boy needing help instead of a bully deserving punishment. End of story. And you? What did you think of this story of transformation and overcoming? Have you experienced something similar or know someone who lived a comparable journey? Share your experience in the comments. It's always special to read real stories. If you believe in the power of compassion and second chances, leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories. Your companionship means a lot.